Good morning, everyone. I'm Meredith Dankaz. I'm the teaching pastor here, and we are kicking off our new series, Healthy. And this is the first Sunday in January, and January is the season of detoxes and cleanses and new diets. Maybe some of you are following the trend, #Veganuary. This is the month that I guess a whole bunch of people are going vegan. So either that or maybe you're starting a new diet or you're giving up sugar. But this is a month where we try to get our relationship with food kind of in order. And I remember a few years ago, for the first time that I gave up sugar, I thought, this isn't that big of, sugar I can quit whenever I want. And so I gave up sugar, and I thought it was fine. But I noticed that my husband, Steve, was giving me like a really wide berth. Like he just was like talking very gingerly to me and calmly. I thought, what's his problem? And then I realized that, maybe I had a bigger problem with sugar than I thought when I was reading a book, and like any rational person, there was something I didn't like in it, and so I threw it across the room, And I thought, wow, okay, maybe I'm a little bit angry about not having sugar. I'm having withdrawal symptoms. So those of you who have given up sugar, good for you, but you should really maybe buy your loved ones flowers or something to say sorry for my bad attitude. But here's the thing, our relationship with food is complicated. Your relationship with food is complicated. And some of you, your palms are sweating right now as you are like, we're going to talk about food today. I wouldn't have known if I had known that I want to come. But here's the thing. Think about even our cultural messages around food, right? We have these cultural messages that you should be able to eat whatever you want, whenever you want. Did you notice that all these ice cream commercials or treat commercials, it's always like a supermodel eating ice cream. So you should be able to eat as much ice cream as you want. And you're never allowed to gain weight, get a wrinkle, get old. You're supposed to be perfect all the time. And we have these two messages, bodies aren't supposed to break down, and you can eat sugar all to your heart's content. And then we think about the reality of just in America alone, a third of our adults are considered overweight or obese, 17% of our kids and youth. But on the other side, we have over 8 million adults, that's both men and women, suffering from eating disorders. Our relationship with food is complicated. But the thing is, food matters. Food matters. It's not just meant to be some, source of just basic nutrients and nutrition, and we just don't think about it. Food matters. In fact, in our biblical narrative, food is almost like a character. Throughout all of Scripture, food matters. Right from the very beginning, our story starts in a garden, and we're told that God made all of these plants and these trees that are fruit-bearing, and they're pleasing to the eye, and they're good for food. The fact that we get hungry and need to eat and be filled again, that's not a flaw in the design that didn't happen after the fall. That's right from the very beginning, that we're meant to be emptied so that we know that our Creator gave us all of this to fill us and to delight us. God uses food to shape his people. He gives them food festivals and feasts and food codes. One of the most important food moments in Scripture is the Passover meal. The Passover story is when God is about to deliver Israel out of Egypt. They've been slaves in Egypt for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And on the evening that they're to be delivered, God says, I want you to have this meal, this very special meal, eaten this very particular way. And then after you're delivered, I want you to do that meal every single year. And your children are going to ask you, why do we do this? And you're going to say, we do this to remember that our good God saved us out of Egypt. See, God has always used food, and food is a good thing. If you want to get to know someone, one of the best ways to get to know them, someone who's of a different culture or from a different place from you, food, right? That's one way that we share who we are. We gather over food, we share food, we celebrate with food. Food is meant to add delight to our life, but our relationship with food can get disordered. Our relationship with food can get off track. In fact, in the Christian tradition, this is called gluttony. Some of us have this misconception that gluttony is just overeating, right? That's it. There's only some people who suffer from gluttony. I'm about to show all of you that everyone in this room, myself included, is a glutton. Because gluttony is complicated. In fact, there's just as our ability to use food in creative and wonderful ways is complex. We have a whole network devoted to it, right? Some of you are total Food Network junkies. You watch every Cupcake Wars and Cake This, and we can see people can do amazing things with food. We also, our ability to use food in a way that is not good is also complicated, because we have this saying, you are what you eat, right? You are what you eat. And that's to remind us, if you put lots of junk food into your body, you're not gonna feel very good. And if you put healthy food in your body, you're probably gonna feel better because you are what you eat. But what we want to talk about today is you're not just what you eat, you are how you eat. How you eat is a sign of how you are. See, gluttony is not a matter of the stomach, it is a matter of the heart. It's not a matter of the stomach, it's a matter of the heart. Frederick Buechner puts it this way: a glutton is one who raids the icebox for a cure for spiritual malnutrition. There's something going on in our heart, and the Christian tradition has held there are 5 ways in which gluttony shows up in our lives. 5 ways in which how we eat reveals something is wrong in our heart, and it's this: too daintily, too sumptuously, too hastily, too greedily, too much. And so we're going to look at each of those, but first I want us to turn to some familiar words of Jesus that will help us potentially think through our relationship with food. These are words that they're not about specifically gluttony, but they help put into perspective what we think about when what's going on inside of our heart, how we are with how we eat. So if you have a Bible, you can turn to Luke chapter 12. We'll be starting in verse 22, but I'm also going to read it out loud to us. So Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear, for life is more than food, and the body is more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than birds? Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and is tomorrow thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? Do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it. For the pagan world runs after all such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So Jesus is speaking to this crowd, and he says, why are you so worried about food? Why is your heart set on it? Why do you care so much about what you eat and you're fixated on it? Life is more than that. And so we want to think about how our relationship with food, which is meant to be something where we get emptied and we're reminded who fills us, gets out of whack. And when we look at how we eat, we can see how we are. So this first form where our relationship with food gets out of whack is known as too daintily. And I have a Starbucks cup here to represent too daintily. I think nothing represents this better, because too daintily is when we fall into this habit of just so, of precise, of I need it my way. And on a Starbucks cup, there are 6 boxes for you to tell someone exactly how you would like your drink. And there are some of you, and you know who you are, that 6 boxes is not enough, right? They have to start like writing on the side and all. And so we can customize down to precisely the way that we want it. And it's not, when it comes to this too daintily, this habit of eating too daintily, it's not that you're not allowed to have a personal preference or like things a certain way. It's that unless it is just so, then I am not satisfied. I need it precise. I need it exactly the way that I want it. C.S. Lewis words this really well in his book, The Screwtape Letters. He calls it the all I want state of mind. He says, the all I want state of mind, all she wants is a cup of tea properly made, or an egg properly boiled, or a slice of bread properly toasted. And she never finds any servant or any friend who can do these things properly, because her properly conceals an insatiable demand for the exact and almost impossible. And that is this too daintily, when we fall into this habit of the heart where it needs to be exact, but it's almost impossible. My husband worked at a really fancy coffee shop in Seattle, and like most things, the more expensive things get, the snobbier the clientele. And there was this one customer who got to the point where there was only one person who could make her drink because she needed it down to a very precise temperature. And so she would come and someone would make it, she'd take it back to her table and come back up and be like, oh, this is too hot. Can you please remake it for me? And then they'd make it again, she'd bring it back to her table, and oh, this is just too cold. And it was like, being with Goldilocks. And it was just over and over and over again. And we hear that and we think, that's kind of crazy. But this is how it shows up in our lives. When we start to fall into this habit of too daintily, it's when we can start to get very picky, in particular about what we eat and what we don't eat. It can come down to portion control, that we're very particular around our portion. It looks like yo-yo dieting or fad dieting. It can look like counting calories. And in very extreme cases, this is what is behind eating disorders. Because eating disorders are never about food. Eating disorders are about control. And when we fall into this too daintily, we think we are how we eat, the heart issue that's going on behind that is I am afraid of being out of control. I don't feel like I can control my life. I can't control the end of my days. Jesus says you can't even add an hour to your life. You are not in control of how long you are on this earth or those that you love. I can't control whether my children are going to graduate or not. I can't control whether I'm going to get promoted or not. I can't control that person who's driving in front of me. I can't control so much in this world. And so I start to take something tangible that's in front of me and I control it. And I feel like now my world makes sense. But when we start to use food to feel in control, we miss the greater kingdom invitation that Jesus has for us. Because Jesus says, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life, since you cannot do this very little thing, right? And that doesn't feel like a very little thing to us because he says it's a very little thing. Why do you worry about the rest? And see, when we get into this habit of the heart of being too daintily, of needing things to be in control, be our way in order to be satisfied, what we miss out on is when you're trying to be in control, you fail to see that you don't need to be in control. You don't need to be in control because there's someone else who is in control. Let me ask you, who of you woke up this morning and wondered, you were worried, I wonder if the earth is gonna make it around the sun today? I'm really concerned, I'm not sure. No, right? God is in control of making sure that our earth orbits the sun every day. You don't worry about that. If God can do that, God can provide anything for you. And did I say it the wrong way? Did I say once a year? Once a year. There you go. My husband is down here and he corrected me. You can see that I'm not the science person in our family. So, once a year. Anyways, I didn't worry about it this morning. That's the thing. Didn't even think about it. So, you missed the point that you don't need to be in control. You do not need to be in control because God is in control. There is someone bigger. There is a bigger story going on, and you miss that. You miss that. Okay, the second form of how our hearts get out of control, get out of line with food, the second form of gluttony is known as too sumptuously. And I have this bowl of cookies here to represent that. And some of you who have given up sugar are like, that is not fair, not nice. They've been sitting out for a while. They're not any good. You don't want them. But the reason why I have this bowl of cookies is it makes me think of my daughter, Imogen. And the first time she had a cookie, she was 2 years old, and she loved it. Now, my husband had this saying back then, never give a toddler a good thing because it never ends well. Those of you who have toddlers are like, amen to that, right? Because once they taste a good thing, that's all they want. And so Imogen had her cookie, and then the next morning, woke her up, and the first thing she says to me is, can we make cookies? I said, oh, honey, we're not gonna make cookies today. And she cried. And then I asked her what she wanted for breakfast, and she said cookies. And I said, oh, we're not gonna have cookies, or cookies are not a breakfast food. And she cried. And then same thing happened at lunch, same thing happened at dinner. And by the end of the day, everyone was feeling bad about that, regretting giving her a cookie. But what we needed to teach her was that cookies are a sometimes food, right? They're not an everyday food. They're an every once in a while food that add delight to life. When we fall into this habit of too sumptuously, right? When we start to eat too sumptuously, it's when we take things that are meant to be occasional and every once in a while and a treat, and suddenly life is not satisfying without them, right? If I don't start my day with this particular muffin, then my day is ruined, right? If I don't have dessert after a meal, I might as well not have woken up today. I need to order the most expensive item on a menu because that's the best, right? Or I always have something exotic, an exotic ingredient that cost me like $15 and I'm just gonna use a pinch of it once and then I'm gonna have this whole cabinet full of exotic things, right? I mean, this is this too sumptuously. And what it shows, the how you are, is that there's this fear of life isn't meaningful or worthwhile if I don't have something special in my day. The ordinary doesn't matter, and I don't matter. And we start to show other people through the decadent and the rich and the delightful that I'm important. So I knew a guy back in Connecticut. He was very wealthy. He'd been very successful in life, and he was a wine connoisseur. This was his thing. He had like a whole wine cellar. And he got to this point where he always brought his own fancy bottle of wine and his own fancy wine glass and his own fancy wine bottle opener to anywhere he went, to restaurants, to dinner parties, and he didn't bring enough to share, right? It was enough for him, because heaven forbid he would have to drink a subpar glass of wine in his own opinion, right? And in part of that, what he was doing, whether he knew it or not, is signaling, do you see who I am? Do you see how special I am? I'm an expert in this. I am able to do this. And so when we fall into this trap, this habit of the heart, if you are how you eat, it's this fear that I'm not worthwhile unless I'm extra special, unless life is filled with extra special things. But we miss out on what Jesus has, because Jesus says, look at the ravens. Look at them. How much more valuable are you than birds? Like, God provides for them. You don't have to earn your value, right? You don't have to do something to be special. You are already special. You miss the heart of God when we're so busy feeding that fear with rich and sumptuous things and delightful things that we miss out. You are already satisfied. You can be satisfied because God already values you and loves you. Okay, the third way in which our eating can get disordered is known as too hastily, and nothing represents that more than the golden arches, right? So let me ask you, who of you recently stopped at McDonald's and you made sure that you drove it home? So first of all, you made it home with your McDonald's, right? You didn't eat it in the car. And you got home and you set out your plate, right? You got a placemat and a glass plate, and you got a fork and a knife and a fancy like cloth napkin tucked in, and you sat down and you laid it all out and you thought, oh, this is gonna be amazing. I'm just gonna savor every bite. And you ate every French fry one at a time, right? You took a bite and you thought, that was the best French fry I ever had in my whole life. I can't wait to have the next one. And then you ate that one and you thanked God for every single bite. No, you don't savor fast food, right? We call it fast food for a reason. It's how fast you get it, but how fast you eat it. Because part of it is if we slowed down with it, we'd realize like, why am I eating this, right? Nobody feels like afterwards like, I made a good choice. That was really, I'm so glad I did that. You think, why did I do that? Every time, right? I do not feel good about that decision. But when we fall into this habit of too hastily, it's when we are eating fast. It's when we're eating on the go. We're eating standing up. We're eating at our desk. We're eating microwave food. We don't have the ability to actually like sit at a table as a family and have a conversation because everyone is so busy and rushing in so many directions that you just grab a sandwich and you get this and you'll have a granola bar and here we go and we'll all just go, 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 go. Right? When we fall into this too hastily, what's going on, if you are how you eat, how you are is, I can't stop. I can't stop because no one else is gonna provide for me. No one else is gonna make this happen, so I have to keep going. I can't stop. I don't have time to savor or have a conversation or linger. I just need to keep going, right? And so we fall into this fear of, if I don't look out for me, no one else is looking out for me. And it can look like, not taking lunch. It can look like a couple saying, well, we don't have time to actually go to a restaurant and have a conversation. Who has time for that nowadays, right? Don't have time. And again, we miss out what Jesus is saying. He says, look at the birds. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. God feeds them. God feeds them because God is good, right? They didn't have to put in so many hours before God said, okay, now I'll provide for you, right? We miss out that God has provided for us. God knows what you need. Now, you might not get what you want, but God knows what you need. And so when we are feeding that fear of no one's gonna provide for me, the reality is we never feel full. We never feel safe. We're always rushing for the next thing. And we can get addicted to that rush, right? We can get addicted to the chemical rush of the food and the rush of our lives, and we feel unsatisfied, so we just keep filling it and filling it and filling it, and we feel more and more unsatisfied, so we fill it more. But when we finally stop, we can realize, I don't need to fill that up. I don't need to store up for myself. I don't need to worry, because God already loves me. All right, our next one is known as too greedily. And there is something that happens in a Mexican restaurant. You know what I'm talking about, right? They put down this bowl of tortilla chips and a bowl of salsa, and it's suddenly like a competition to see who can get as many chips in their mouth before the bowl runs out, right? They're going to refill it. It is bottomless, but we think, what if this one time they run out of chips, right? The whole restaurant runs out of chips, and I let someone else get some, and I didn't get my share. That would be terrible. It'd be like tragic, right? And so we eat them mindlessly, even if they're not good. So Steve and I were at a restaurant recently, and we're like, this salsa kind of tastes like ketchup. This is terrible. We ate the whole bowl, and we ate the second bowl too, right? There's just something about that where you think, of course, you just eat faster. Like, he might get more than me, right? And this too greedily, it's a scarcity mindset. There's not enough to go around. This was particularly true in my husband's family. So they grew up where there were 4 children, 2 adults, and they only went grocery shopping once a month. So once a month, there was this mass influx of food, and the kids would be like, well, that's gonna go pretty fast. So they would go and like raid the kitchen, and they each had their own secret hiding place, and then they'd see each other like walking out and being like, where'd you get those Oreos? Right? So they stash things away because there's not gonna be enough. And I had to work with my husband when we first got married to be like, there's enough. You don't need to hide food. Like there's plenty. Like I'm not gonna take it all, right? And there were also moments where he'd be like, oh, we have like 1 can of green beans. Like we don't need to go grocery shopping. Like you're like, oh no, we can add more. We're not in a scarcity mindset. But this can happen, and it's also a cultural thing. Right? This is where we struggle culturally, because in America, we have more food than what we know what to do with. We waste 40% of the food available to us every year. $165 billion of food is wasted in our country alone, where other countries starve, because we have fallen into a mindset, there's not enough. What if it runs out? This is like when you go to Costco and you buy this giant thing of applesauce, and then you think, I should probably get 2. Probably not gonna get to the second one for like 6.5 months, but what if someone else takes it? They take the last jar, and then I can't get a second one, so I should take it now, right? Or like you've been in this, like you're in a buffet line, and you look behind you and you think, that's a lot of people. That's not that much food. There's no way I'm getting seconds, so I'm gonna take my seconds now, right? Or you take the biggest piece or the best piece because you think, I need to get mine while the getting's good. Right? Because if I don't get mine, then someone else is gonna get it, and that's not fair. And so we start to, the fear is there's not enough. No one's looking out for me. There's not enough. But Jesus says this to us, and do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it, for the pagan world runs after all such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. See, when we are rushing around in this scarcity mindset, the reality is you trying to make yourself secure never makes you feel secure. You never feel secure. You can't make yourself feel secure. The only thing that makes us feel secure is a heart that's rooted in God's kingdom. That's where our security lies, that God is not a God of scarcity. God is a God of abundance. God gives and gives in plenty. Now, the last form is what's known as too much. And for that, I have Jell-O, because we hear there's always room for Jell-O, right? There's always room for a little bit of Jell-O. In fact, when I lived in Michigan, I learned that this is known as a salad there. People would be like, I'll bring a salad for dinner, and they brought a bowl of Jell-O. I'm like, that's not a salad, that's Jell-O. Like, that's kind of dessert, but this idea of too much, and this one is a hard one to talk about, mainly because we've come to think that too much is simply a lack of self-control. There's a group of people who just can't control themselves around food, and that is not what's going on here. Because remember, you are how you eat. And when we fall into this pattern, what it's really about is a pattern of distraction. It's a pattern of distraction. And this is the form of gluttony that I struggled with for years and didn't know it. And so growing up, I was overweight most of my life. I was the fat kid growing up, and I was really overweight all through college. And I didn't realize that I was using food to pad myself from something that I didn't want to know about, that I didn't want to feel. I didn't consciously connect that. And that's often what's going on with this. It can look like eating when you're not hungry, snacking mindlessly. You have a bigger portion than what you need. And sometimes it shows up externally, as it did for me, and sometimes it doesn't. But it creates this padding in us of, before I even feel uncomfortable, I reach for something that comforts me, right? One sign of it is that you start to fixate on food. You start to center your life around what you're going to eat. So in the middle of eating a meal, you start to think about what you're going to eat for the next meal, and you worry about that. And that's what I noticed was going on inside of me. And after I started following Jesus, I realized, food seems to matter a little bit too much for me, right? It wasn't I need to lose weight, it was just that my mind seems worried and preoccupied with this. And Henry Nouwen talks about preoccupation is when we fill a space before we get there. I seem to be filling space with worry and concern before I even get there. And so I just prayed one day, God, I pray that this just wouldn't matter as much to me, right? I didn't know what was going on. I just prayed that this wouldn't matter as much to me. And God started to answer that prayer, and it wasn't overnight, it was gradual. But as food started to lose its grip over my heart, the thing that bubbled up were all these feelings that I didn't know were there, right? These feelings of loneliness and disappointment and heartache and depression and anger. And suddenly I had all of this emotion that I had been distracting myself from. Because when we fall into this pattern of too much, there is something out there that feels like it will consume me if I give it any space at all. If I notice it or acknowledge it, it will eat me alive. And so we just keep ourselves distracted from it and distracted from it and distracted from it. We miss out, again, on the healing that Jesus has for us. See, Jesus tells us that we don't need to be afraid. He says, do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. And see, the kingdom, what we miss out on is when we're distracting ourselves, is the kingdom is a place of healing and wholeness and restoration. In the kingdom, death does not have the last word, but your wounds do not get the last word. And we miss out on the healing that God has for us and the salvation that Jesus has for us when we are so busy distracting and patting ourselves from it. I can tell you it was one of the hardest things that I ever had to walk through, to actually acknowledge all of this pain that I didn't even know was there. But I wouldn't be who I am today without it, right? I wouldn't have been healed the way that I've been healed without it. And we miss out that Jesus is going to heal us, that he wants to save us, that he wants to rescue us, that we don't need to be afraid, that there is nothing that he cannot redeem. See, gluttony is not a matter of the stomach. It is a matter of the heart. You are how you eat. And so today is not we're all going to stack hands and we're all going to start a new diet, or we're all going to start managing our behavior or counting our calories or exercising more. Those may be things that you do, but today is about saying, you know what, I'm going to actually have the courage to examine how I eat, examine my relationship with food, and see where my heart is, what the state of my heart currently is, because Jesus says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And food can both distract us and block us from living in the heart of God, but it can also reorient us to the heart of God. And there's two practices that the church has given us in order to help how we eat orient us towards the heart of God. And the first one is known as fasting. And now there's been all this physical research done on fasting about how, physically when we go without food for a period of time, it gives our cells time to replenish and to refuel, and it makes us healthier. But I think there's a spiritual reality to that too, that when we go without for a bit, it allows our heart and our soul to be replenished. And there's this misconception about fasting, that fasting is about feeling really miserable, feeling really hungry, and being really, really suffering for Jesus so that he can change our hearts. And that's not what fasting is about. Fasting is about making space. My friend Dan Allender says it's about setting the stage so that God can show up in our lives, right? And two ways that fasting can look. One is actually going without a meal for a period of time, whether that's skipping breakfast or lunch or dinner. And that's not then to feel really fixated on feeling really hungry. It's to replace that during that time when I do feel hungry, to have a promise of God right beside me. Life is more than food, right? Do not be afraid, little flock. Where your heart is, there your treasure is also. Let's set an intention with it. But another way to fast is you can give up a particular item for a longer period of time, right? Because some of you aren't able to go without a meal for one reason or another, right? But you can give up coffee, or you can give up sugar, or you can give up bread, or you can give up meat. And in that, again, as we allow some absence in our life, it's to reorient our heart to say, God, what do you want to show me? Who do you want me to be? What do you want me to do? It reminds us life is more than food. But the last practice that Jesus has given us is known as the Eucharist, or communion, or the Lord's Supper. And for some of you, you've never taken that. Maybe you've seen it in a movie or on TV, or you've been to a church before but not participated. It's when we take bread in the cup, either wine or juice, and we remember what Jesus did for us, right? And for some of you, this is a ceremony at church. Some of you, it's a very meaningful ceremony, and some of you, it's a ceremony that's mixed, right? Like you were taught, well, communion only counts if you feel really, 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 really bad about yourself, and you feel really, 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 really sorry, and that's how you're supposed to feel when you go take communion. But actually, Eucharist means thanksgiving. And the original context of this is Jesus is having dinner with his disciples, and he takes two ordinary, regular elements that would be at the meal, bread and wine. They would be at almost every single meal, and they weren't special things. They weren't like only some people could get that, or you only had it every once in a while, or only really rich people could afford it. He took two things that were common and ordinary and part of their everyday experience, and he said, whenever you do this, whenever you eat bread, whenever you drink from the cup, I want you to remember me. I want you to remember how much I love you. I want you to remember what I did for you. I want you to remember who I am and who I am to you every single time. This would have been a regular thing every time you eat bread, every time you drink out of the cup. The ordinary things of life, not some special ceremony. And so for us, it's the same thing, that the ordinary things of life can reorient us to the heart of God. It can be, goldfish and apple juice, peanut butter and jelly, coffee and toast, cereal and milk. It's taking the ordinary elements of food to say, this reminds me who God is, who I am to God. I can use it to reorient my life and begin to sow in gratitude and peace and acknowledgement of who God is. I love this quote by Norman Worsba. He says, whenever people come to the table, they demonstrate with the unmistakable evidence of their stomachs that they are not self-subsisting gods. They are finite and mortal creatures dependent on God's many good gifts: sunlight, photosynthesis, decomposition, soil fertility, water, bees and butterflies, chickens, sheep, cows, gardeners, farmers, cooks, strangers, and friends. Eating reminds us that we participate in a grace-saturated world. It means you start this new year, you have the courage to look at how you eat, to really get a sense of how you are. And may you allow food, whether it is going without or whether it is reorienting our everyday experience with food, may you allow it to recenter your heart, to bring you back into alignment with God, and to remind you that we live in a grace-saturated world. Let's pray. Gracious God, thank you. Thank you for all the ways you provide for us, all the ways that you love us. Jesus, thank you for the promises that you give us, that we do not need to be afraid, that we do not need to store up for ourselves, that we do not need to earn our value, and that there is nothing that you cannot heal, there is nothing that you cannot redeem, that death and our wounds do not get the final say over who we are, that you get the last word in our life. So God, as we start this year, would you help us to look at how we eat and recognize the state of our heart and bring that before you, to allow you to heal our hearts, to heal our lives, and to set us free, that we may live and savor and acknowledge and recognize that we are in a grace-saturated world, that you have provided everything we need, and we do not need to be afraid because you have been pleased to give us the kingdom. We thank you and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.